Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today in Unit 7, the idea of duty, we are going to start our lecture with topic types of duties. Often a distinction is made between negative duties and positive duties. While the former requires other people to merely refrain from acting in certain ways, to do nothing that violates the related rights. The second requires that the people act positively to do something. The first calls for refraining from action or non interference, while the later calls for action or intervention. However, such a distinction is far too native. Often, the so called negative duties call for extensive positive action. For instance, the right to security does not merely call for abstinence from injury or assault, but involves contributions in terms of taxes and public supports to maintain an extensive system of public security. Sometimes the so called positive duties might be embroiled in a complex set of abstention and intervention. Subsistence rights, for instance, involve the duty to support the deprived as well as extending the enabling support to the deprived to be self supportive on the basis of their own work. The latter may call forth a series of interventions and non interventions. We have to distinguish between the duty not to violate a right and the duty to prevent violation of rights. For instance, duty not to assault others is not the same as the duty to prevent a third person from assaulting someone when one could protect the victim from such an attack. The first is of greater import than the second. There is no one to one pairing between kinds of duties and kinds of rights. The fulfillment of rights may call for multiple kinds of duties. For every basic right, three types of duties are suggested: duties to avoid depriving, duties to protect from deprivation, and duties to aid the deprived. For example, with regard to personal security, everyone has the duty not to endanger a person's security, to protect people against deprivation of their security by other people, to provide for the security of those unable to provide for their own. It is impossible for any right to be fully guaranteed unless all three types of duties are fulfilled. Although different types of duties have differential binding force, duties to avoid depriving demand that one refrains from making an unnecessary gain for oneself by means detrimental to the claim of others. Such duties bind us not to undertake a course of action that deprives others of a means which, without such action, would have provided a satisfaction. Further, such an action was not called for to meet one's basic rights as the only realistic option in the context. The duty to protect arises when the duty to avoid is not fulfilled. It is a secondary duty enforcing the primary duty of avoiding deprivation to others. It calls upon sometimes individuals and at other times groups or institutions to enforce this duty. In many societies, the governments acting on behalf of common interest enforce such duty. There are three subcategories of duties to aid which beget transfer of resources to those who cannot provide for their own survival. There are duties to aid attached to certain roles or relationships. Such duties are the concern of only those who are in a particular relationship and are directed towards specific persons. Duties of parents towards their young children and duties of grown up children towards their aged parents come under this category. Suppose some people have acted in such a way as to eliminate the last available means of subsistence and the responsible government has failed to protect the victim. The duty to aid the later falls on those responsible for the deprivation. In such cases, there is a failure to perform duties and the victims were harmed by both actions and omission of actions by other people. A third kind of deprivation is not on account of failure in duty but is, in a sense, natural, such as in situations of hurricane or earthquake. The victims in this instance are helpless in the face of truly great obstacles to their existence. They are, however, able to maintain themselves if they are provided with protection and if they are left alone. They will die due to lack of means of subsistence. One of the major expressions of duty to aid is the duty to design social institutions that do not exceed the capacity of individuals and groups. If duties to avoid and to protect are fulfilled, duties to assist may not be urgently called for. But in the event of failure to avoid deprivation and to extend protection, duty to aid could assume a great deal of importance. The above explanation goes to suggest that the scope of duty is significantly different from that of right, although one cannot speak of duties without eventually relating them to rights. As the scope of duty gets markedly varied, as we move beyond their immediate correspondence to rights. There are rights which are not immediately tied up with duties. There are four kinds of rights that are generally spoken of. There are four kinds of rights that are generally spoken of. The first one is claim rights. They are the demands that one party has upon another in such instances. While A has a right, B has a reciprocal duty. Those who argue for the mutualities of rights and duties often restrict rights to claim rights. For example, workers have claim rights on their wages. Their employees have a duty to pay them wages mutually agreed upon. The second one is liberty rights. Often they are simply called as liberties. They do not immediately suggest duties. For example, my right to wear a dress does not invoke a corresponding duty. from others in an immediate sense. The third one is powers. Laws and customs invest certain distinct capacities on people which might be possessed by all, such as the right to vote or confined to a select few, such as the power to adjudicate invested in the judges. Such powers do not necessarily have corresponding duties. Fourth one is immunities. Immunities are counterposed to powers and therefore are protection against the reach of powers. For instance, the power of conscription may be vested in some authorities in a state, but immunity provides safety valves against such powers. Again, they are not correlated with a set of duties. Liberties, powers, and immunities do not have correlated duties, marking an enlarged space for rights. Now let us move to sum up the unit. Although rights and duties are often correlated, different theories and perspectives may apportion different weights to rights and duties. Duties are prioritized in perspectives which valorize substantive conception of what is good and what is bad. Within liberal tradition itself, there might be distinct perspective on rights and duties, while dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, and fascist leaders have underscored duties and decried rights. There are other perspectives which have argued that rights can be honored only if an ambience for the same is sustained through duties. Mahatma Gandhi prioritized duties and argued that only those have claims on rights who have performed their duties. Even if there is a correlation between duties and rights, they cannot be paired with each other one in one. Although rights and duties often invoke each other, their ambits markedly vary. There are rights which have no immediate correlated duties. There are duties which, as they distance themselves from their immediate correlation with rights, lead to sustenance of common good. Here we want to close today's lecture, and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you so much for your attention.